Hello and welcome. I am live from Pellam's Wasteland, and today I have another episode of Pellam's Wasteland Reads for you all. This time covering Powers of Darkness by Bram Stoker and Vladimar Asmundsson, and also Hans Cornel de Roos, I guess how you say um, the name. This is kind of a complicated one, an interesting one, because this Powers of Darkness is a different version, a not so much a fan fiction version, although I suppose if you wanted to think of it that way, you could, but a version of Dracula that was translated into Icelandic, but in the process of translation, a number of changes were made to the story. Um, and then it has since been translated back into English after discovering what's up with the Icelandic version. And so this is kind of a interesting alternate version of the Dracula story. Vladimar Asmundsson was a newspaper man and a writer from the time, the kind of same late 19th century period as Bram Stoker. Was familiar with Dracula and decided to serialize it in his newspaper. Classic concept of the time, putting a novel in serial form in newspaper, and that he would translate Dracula to do this. But as he went along, he made a number of changes to the story. The kind of there are sort of two sections to Powers of Darkness. It's unclear precisely why, but Vladimar Asmundsson expanded the first section, the kind of very first chunk of Dracula, where in the original story, Jonathan Harker goes to Dracula's castle, and there's weird stuff going on, and he doesn't totally understand. And then after that point, the story switches back to England, and we see all the stuff with Mina and Lucy back in England and all that stuff. Um, in Powers of Darkness, that first section has been expanded, and the entire rest of the novel has been contracted way down, although still with some interesting story changes, which is kind of a neat element of this particular story. But the I would say second half in main Dracula, it's more like the last like three quarters of the novel, maybe even more than that. And in this version, it's more like the last quarter of the novel or less than that is very different. So it's very very compressed down, and it's probably not as good. It definitely starts to feel very summary like in a lot of those sections, which is unfortunate because the opening section that is Jonathan Harker, or in Powers of Darkness, his name is Thomas Harker, in the castle. That part is really excellent, and it is expanded and is really, really interesting. A lot of the expansion has to do with the kind of menace. There's more kind of clear, I suppose, the kind of cruelty of the vampire. This Dracula as a villain is a lot more upfront. There's not the sense of quite so much trying to, I guess, not so much deception in some sense. Um, there's also other characters. There's servants in the castle now. There's a young woman who is the bride of Dracula type, which there's the sort of sequence in Dracula that has to do with the brides. But this version is much more. One of the things people have pointed out is that this version, perhaps because of different censorship standards, is much more kind of willing to take something that's kind of subtextual in main Dracula and make that clear, kind of elevate it into a part of the text. So especially the idea of the vampire and the relationship between the vampire and sex, essentially, is expanded upon pretty significantly. This idea of seductiveness, but also of kind of a a real kind of sexual component to vampire violence, for lack of a better description, is an interesting addition. There's also some really interesting elements of the I guess you might say the conspiracy is perhaps the right term. Dracula as this kind of figure of leadership in an international conspiracy attempting to bring down the Western European democracies to return the world to a state of autocratic executive authority in a way that is, particularly fitting for the tyrannical vampires, is an interesting little extra twist that I don't think is really there in the original Dracula, but is definitely a part of Powers of Darkness. This sense of the vampire being kind of uh, I don't know, the relationship between the vampire and the world at large is different, which is really interesting, and seems to kind of anticipate a lot of other ideas about vampire stories after Dracula, which is, I think, part of the really interesting thing to me is this. There's it feels like there's all of these elements of the way that this character of Dracula is transformed for this version of the story, that just feel so modern, so forward thinking, I suppose, in the sense of other later, sometimes intentionally kind of subversive or reimaginations of the vampire concept that use some of these elements. And so it's really neat to see this idea of, the more explicit relationship between sexual violence, between kind of political exploitation, between this kind of tyrannical figure, all as being sort of a part of it. There's a really great sequence in Powers of Darkness that is a sort of a kind of a cannibalistic human sacrifice event, a terrifying ceremony that is awesome. That is definitely the peak of the whole thing. Our protagonist, Thomas Harker, sneaks around through the castle and finds his way to this underground chapel and sees this vampiric ceremony, and it's so cool and so fun and feels so incredibly modern in a way that I think Dracula itself, while I liked it, does not always feel nearly so modern or so um, uh, contemporary, so easy to kind of see it as part of the world today, right? This idea that there are parts of Dracula that feel um, kind of aged, I guess, is the way to put it, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And I think this one has elements like that too, but it is really neat to see these kind of innovative elements of the vampire fiction in Powers of Darkness. Unfortunately, a lot of that kind of goes not totally out the wayside, but is a lot less present in the second half. Like I said, it is much shorter. It is much more just kind of a summary of events. It's no longer written in any character's voice. Dracula itself is an epistolary novel, so everything in the novel is journal entries and letters and diaries and things like that. and that's true of the first section of this one, that is Thomas Harker's diary, but it's not true of this the what would be basically the rest of the Dracula novel, that is so compressed here. And it definitely loses something in that compression is not as exciting, although there are still a couple of kind of fun ideas hinted at, in particular the relationship between Dracula, between the vampire and some of the other characters who are involved in the story but don't really have an encounter with the vampire except every just a little bit. They're I think in particular kind of all of, and at the same time there's not really much Lucy stuff in this version, so it's kind of a, I don't know, it's an interesting trade-off. I don't think that this is as good as Dracula as a whole. I mean, the real compression of the second part of the story takes so much away from the feel of this as like an intense immersive book, unfortunately, because the first section really is immersive and intense in that way, but the second section, it loses so much. But at the same time, it is a really kind of interesting cultural artifact as much as anything. So I think I would recommend checking it out. It's cool to read a version of this story that is kind of it seems like an attempt to be faithful to the themes, but willing to make a number of changes in the details that are interesting and fun. So yeah, Powers of Darkness, it's pretty cool. I guess I would, on the whole, recommend it if you, especially if you like Dracula and want to see kind of somebody else's vision of a slightly altered form of Dracula. It's a cool cultural artifact as much as anything. So yeah, check it out. Powers of Darkness, Bram Stoker and Vladimar Asmundsson. But that is going to be all for me for today. So thank you so much for watching or listening. If you have any comments, leave them down below. Otherwise, I've been live from Pellam's Wasteland, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.